Hey, what's up guys, and welcome back to another Reddit story video. Today we are going to be reading some very dark Reddit stories. Now while these stories are scary, spooky, and even a little disturbing, they are very fun to both read and listen along to. If you haven't seen any videos like this from me before, I have a playlist filled with tons of Reddit videos, so feel free to click on that and watch all of those after you finish watching this one. But before we get into the video, please make sure to like this one and subscribe to the channel. If you didn't know, this channel has a goal to get to 10,000 subscribers before the year ends, and I think it may just be possible, so please subscribe to the channel. And alright, without any further ado, for the first time in 2.5 months, let's get into some scary Reddit stories. My wife went to her high school reunion. Everyone insisted she died 15 years ago. Emily was so excited about her high school reunion. She spent the whole week leading up to it digging through old photos, reminiscing about friends, wondering who had changed the most. It was about a 2-hour drive, so I expected her to check in, maybe send me a few pictures of old friends, but when I didn't hear from her all night, I started to worry. At 2 a.m., she finally called. She was crying. "They didn't recognize me," she whispered. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. "What do you mean?" "They thought I was dead." She got home at dawn, pale and shaking. I made her tea, sat her down, and tried to get the full story. When she arrived at the reunion, she expected nostalgia, hugs, maybe some awkward small talk. Instead, she got blank stares. People whispered behind her back, some avoided her completely. Then, halfway through the night, an old friend, Sarah, finally approached her. And the first thing she said was, "This isn't funny." Emily laughed nervously. "What do you mean?" Sarah's face twisted in anger. "You died, Emily." It wasn't a joke. Sarah pulled out her phone, scrolling through an old memorial page. Emily's face stared back at her. A tribute post, dozens of comments, photos from her teenage years, classmates sharing memories, a funeral date, everything. Emily nearly fainted. "I don't understand," she told Sarah. "I'm standing right here." Sarah backed away like she had seen a ghost. "That's not possible," she whispered. Emily showed them her driver's license, her ID, pulled up her Facebook profile, but her name, her records, everything from before the accident was gone. One of the teachers even called Emily's parents. They didn't answer. When she left the reunion, no one said goodbye. They just watched her like she was something that shouldn't exist. We spent the whole morning researching. What she saw, what she experienced, the page was real. The comments were real. People had mourned her. According to the internet, Emily Roberts died in a car accident when she was 18 years old. A hit and run. She has no memory of this. Her family never mentioned it. So we called them. Her mother answered on the first ring. Before Emily could say a word, her mother burst into tears. "Sweetheart, please, stop calling us." Emily went pale. "Mom, what are you talking about?" Her mother just sobbed. "Whoever you are, please stop pretending to be my daughter." The line went dead. I watched Emily break in front of me. She wasn't hysterical, she didn't cry. She just stared ahead at nothing. Like her mind couldn't process what was happening. I tried to tell her there had to be a mistake, but I knew that wasn't true, because I had started to notice that something was wrong. Her photos, old ones from childhood, had vanished from my phone. Her birth certificate was missing from our documents, and when I went to look at our marriage license, my hands shaking, her name wasn't on it. There was just my signature, a blank space where hers should have been. Emily hasn't spoken in hours. She just sits on the couch, staring at nothing. I don't know what to do. Because if my wife really isn't Emily Roberts, who the hell have I been married to for the past 5 years? I'll never use a public restroom again. There I was, waiting in line for the ladies' room for probably the millionth time in my life. The rumblings of conversation from around me tickling my ears and begging me to listen in. Women of all shapes, sizes, and walks of life surrounding me in a malformed cocoon of social anxiety. I nervously fiddled with the bottom of my band tee, trying not to look anyone in the eye. Pairs of shoes stared up at me, judging my introverted nature. A woman in a biker jacket and tattered skirt that just barely kissed the bottom of her cheeks shuffled backward into me, causing my gaze to shift upward as I rambled in an apology for existing behind her. Her piercing aquamarine eyes, sharpened by eyeliner wings, gave a quick flash of something like disgust before averting themselves and focusing back on her friend. That's when I saw it. The room was empty of life. From where I was standing, I could see that its walls were painted a dull hospital green, the floors lined with a bright white linoleum that hadn't appeared to have seen the trotting of feet ever in its life, and stalls, dozens and dozens of stalls cut off like cubicles so that if one were to sit, you might see their head poking above the sanitized walls. But it was a bathroom. It had to be, and I was already shifting in place, trying my best to hold on to control of my bladder, and I was losing it quickly. I pondered a moment on whether or not it was worth going in. Why hadn't anyone else? Maybe it wasn't open, maybe it was a men's room. My bladder protested. Who cares? Do you want to piss yourself in front of all these people? Walk back to the party covered in urine? No, I really didn't. So I squeezed out of line and gently prodded the door open further. The motion-sensing lights kicked on, and I could see that it was definitely a restroom. There were sinks lining the walls, facing the cubicles. A giant window peered over the room with its beige curtains shut tight like it didn't want to be caught peeking. I weaved my way through the cubicles, trying to find the one farthest from sight in case someone wandered in. The toilets themselves were odd. Not really toilets, but more of a bench that several people could sit on, with holes penetrating the genital slope to the drain. Weird, but the steadily increasing pressure in my bladder begged me not to think too hard on it. And as I closed on the very corner stall, I was greeted by the sounds of conversation taking place outside in the line, bursting into the room. They must have seen me walk in and decided to investigate themselves rather than wait eons for the other restroom to open up. The ladies spread out like a swarm of flies, looking for a place to land, and the stalls quickly filled up, including the one I was planning on using. So much for that idea, I thought. The biker girl and her friend took the spot I had set out for, and before I knew it, every single stall was full. The benches were shared by 2 to 3 women, engaging in conversation like it was completely normal to do so while you used the bathroom with your friends. I looked around for an open spot. It was hopeless. I didn't know any of these women, and despite being on the verge of wetting myself, I wasn't about to mix my pee with a stranger's. As I weaved in and out of cubicles to get to the door, keeping my head down and avoiding eye contact at all costs, a loud mechanical clunking caught my attention. The curtains to the large window were opening, sliding back into the walls like a second eyelid. What lay beyond them was not the dreary, dark cityscape that waited outside the building, but what could only be described as the most brilliantly blinding light known to man. As the eye of the window opened, I looked around to see everyone had turned their heads to gaze into it. Their expressions, once vibrant with laughter and conversation, now drooping and void of any life. I waved my hand in front of the girl closest to me. No response. Not even a blink. I had the feeling that if I turned and gave the light a longer gaze, that it would swallow me whole and I would be transformed into a mindless husk like everyone else there. So instead, I looked around, unsure of what to do. I was terrified, but I couldn't leave them like this. What was this, though? How could I even help? I noticed that beneath every single person, there was a dark fluid leaking out, like oil seeping out of a leaky engine. The room began to smell. It reminded me of the deer carcass in the woods my father and I had stumbled upon when I was a kid. A thick stench that invaded my nostrils with putrid rot. This only increased my fear. I was no longer worried about having to piss, as a warm patch blossomed in the crotch of my jeans. I began to sprint toward the door. I was going to call for help, but I was stopped in my tracks as I reached for the door handle by a shadow rising up from the floor and slithering its way toward the ceiling. Something had risen and was blocking that unholy light. I turned around to see one of the women held in the air like a limp ragdoll. Her pants pulled around her ankles, and her limbs dangled lifelessly from her. I couldn't see her eyes, but I knew they were staring blankly into the light. As I watched, she began to writhe and squirm, a low groan emitting from her mouth. Her stomach began to bubble and shift beneath her blouse like something was inside trying to desperately escape. She began to turn slowly in the air until she was facing the rest of us. Her eyes were white and her mouth began to widen, the groan growing louder and more forceful. Her stomach had swelled so much that she almost looked pregnant, whatever was inside pushing the boundaries of how far her skin would stretch. I took a deep breath inward, and at that same moment, she began to spew a dark, vicious liquid all over the girl sitting nearest to her. She looked as though she were deflating. The skin on her belly started to wrinkle as it lost its shape. The women before her stayed still in their stupor, not the least bit fazed. Their faces became coated in the bile until it dripped from their chins in thick globs. It clotted like blood against their skin. The goo was in their open eyes and their mouths, and the stench that was already filling the room had reached its peak. I struggled not to heave up my dinner. Plastered in place with fear and fascination, the scene unfolding before me was disgusting, but I couldn't bring myself to turn away. I came to my senses when those who had been covered in thick bile started to bloat and spew their own vicious liquid onto the next wave of people, and then they, in turn, did the same until the whole room was covered in that foul-smelling liquid. I turned back to the door and tried the handle. It wouldn't turn. "This can't be happening. This can't be happening," I whispered. The rasping groan had returned, and it was growing. It echoed off of the walls and became almost too loud to bear. I fought against the door, praying it would bust off of its hinges and let me go, but it wouldn't budge. I kept hoping someone might hear me as I slammed against it, but the hallway on the other side was quiet. I was faced with two options. Either stay facing the door that blocked my only escape, or turn and face the horror behind me. I peeked over my shoulder to see what was happening, and caught a glimpse of a girl in a skin-tight sequined dress shaking violently. There were chunks of bile flying off of her, and the sequins on her dress danced in her frenzy. I could see her mouth starting to foam, saliva mixing with the dark clotted ichor that was in her mouth. I felt a scream threaten to burst from my mouth, but caught it just in time to watch her contort. Her joints looked unnatural and loose, spinning freely, making her skin pucker and twist. She scrambled to her feet, her knees bending first in the wrong direction, making her look like she would fall face first into the pooled stomach contents on the floor. The others were getting up too. I turned around and watched as every single one of them frantically got up and began to come toward me like a pack of hungry wolves. None of them could stay up, their limbs sliding around their failing joints, but they were determined. Their groaning was intolerable. The stench was unbearable, but I couldn't stay there. I frantically looked around for some way to escape. They were coming, but slowly, foam seeping from their open mouths and their soulless white eyes wide open. They kept falling over each other, but not once did they look anywhere else. Their gaze was fixed on me. I found a vent just large enough for me to squeeze into, just above the sinks to my right. It was loose and probably my only option for escaping whatever that was happening in the bathroom. I quickly dashed to the sinks and climbed up. There were only a few feet away, and I couldn't afford to lose any time. I wrenched the vent open, splitting my finger in the process, and started to pull myself in. At the sight of the blood on my finger, the contorting mass went into a frenzy. They quickly closed the gap, and I could feel one of them pulling at my feet. I lost a hold on the vent and crashed down onto the sink. My leg was being held by a behemoth of a woman. Her probably once beautiful and meticulously curled blonde hair was matted and hanging limply from her skull. Thick foam spattered her lips as she opened her mouth wide and snapped at my feet like a wild rabid dog. A terrible sound coming from deep in her throat. It was like the gurgling of a thick pasta sauce boiling. Her teeth making an awful clanking sound as they tried desperately to make purchase in my flesh. I could see her stomach filling, bubbling, under her thin floral printed shirt. The seams of it looked like they were about to burst. I kicked at her face desperately. She was strong. Her fingers dug into my ankles. One of my kicks landed square on her jaw, and it slid out of its socket, leaving her already gaping mouth hanging open even farther. Her grip loosened, and I wrenched myself back up onto the sink and up into the vent. The duct was too narrow to move through, so I sat there sobbing for what felt like hours. When I dared to look out into the bathroom, they were still there, surrounding the sinks with their blank stares, aimed right up at the opening. The light from the open window casting shadows into their mouths that made them look endlessly deep. I had no hope of moving farther into the vent, and I sure as hell wasn't going back out the way I came. So I waited, hoping maybe the horde would move and I could find another way out. I was sliding into sleep when I heard the jingle of keys and a voice in the hallway. I don't know what you're testing in here, but can you please make sure to clean up after yourselves this time? It reeks in here, and last time I got it on my clothes. Took for weeks to get that smell out. And alright guys, that's gonna do it for this one. Thank you guys so much for watching. This was Dark Stories on Reddit. I was a pretty big fan of these two stories, especially the first one, and I hope you guys enjoyed it too. Before ending this video, I quickly wanted to mention the creation of my second channel. Last year, I kind of had a split audience in what types of background video they wanted going on behind these Reddit videos, so I figured why not give both sides of my audience respective versions that they want to watch. That way they can choose and everyone is satisfied. I also plan for the channel to maybe have some more personal things posted on there, so you can look out for uploads like that as well. With that being said, if you could head over there and hit the subscribe button, it would greatly help out that channel and it would help out this channel as well. I would also greatly appreciate it. Anyway, let me know what types of videos you would like to see on this channel, on that channel, just period in 2025. And with that being said, I will see you guys in the next one. See ya.